Speaker, preacher, and writer Max Lucado talks about a time, he has great memories of when he was in high school and before. He and his family would go on fishing trips up north, and they'd load up their camper and they'd drive up and they'd fish for a number of days. And he was always excited and ready to go on these trips, and had, when the time came around for spring break and he was ready to go, he had these images in his mind of the sun shining and of sitting on the water talking with family or friends and the fish biting and the rod bending and the reel spinning as he brought a bass in and landed it in the boat. He could hardly wait, and finally the day came. They loaded up the camper and headed north. They arrived at night and set up the camper, went to bed eagerly to get up the next day. But what happened when they got up the next day is it was extremely windy, and it was far too windy to take the boat out on the water. So they decided, well, no big deal. We have a few more days. We'll just stay in the camper and we'll do what we can do. We'll play Monopoly and we will read the Reader's Digest, which they did, and the day passed, and they got through just fine, went to bed, got up the next morning. The problem was, the next morning, it was worse. Not only was it windy, but the temperature had dropped, and it was just colder and colder, and once again, it was too rough to go out, too cold to go out, so they said, okay, no problem, we got another day or so, we'll just stay inside, we'll play Monopoly again, and we'll reread the Reader's Digest once more, and we'll get through the day. And they did that, and they went to bed eager to get up the next day. But when they got up the next day, it was not only windy and cold, now it was sleeting and icing. No problem, we'll stay inside and we'll try to play Monopoly again, and we'll try to read something in the Reader's Digest we have not read, and we'll try not to kill each other. The fourth day, the last day, they got up and it was worse. And so they packed up and went home. 4 disappointed and disgruntled fishermen. Now, in the book, he says, well, life has lessons, always things to learn, and life has a theology of its own. He said, there was something I learned in that experience of going fishing but not fishing. And he said it wasn't about fishing at all, it was about people. It was really quite simple. And that is that when fishermen don't fish, they get angry. They get sad. They just get disgruntled because they aren't doing what they have set out to do. And I thought about that. I thought about that because it applies not merely to fishing, but it applies to anything in life that we feel passionately called to do. That we feel, this is something I want to do. This is something I'm good at. This is something that brings me joy and fulfillment. This is something that feeds my soul and gives me life. And when we don't do those things, and sadness sets in, depression sets in, anger can set in, people can become despondent, they can become hypercritical. When you inwardly focus, it just gets worse and worse and worse. There's this downward spiral. It happens in individuals, it happens in institutions, organizations. We focus on things, we become more despondent and critical, and the spiral goes down, and the positivity disappears, and the negativity becomes blinding. Until eventually we find ourselves lost in darkness, unsure of how to get out. All of this kind of spun around in my mind as a week or so ago, I was gathered with a group of clergy. We've been meeting together, 50, 60 of us, for 20 years, 22 to be precise for me, from larger churches, successful clergy, successful congregations. We've been meeting together. Churches that are doing well to discuss what's going on in the country with Christianity, what's going on in the country with churches, because churches are not doing well and Christianity is declining in this country. I mean, we can all name those big churches that are doing good, but really, those big churches are doing good because some other one is failing, and those people that are left have just come over there. Statistics prove this in a remarkable way. And there are multiple reasons for this decline, and it's not just Protestants, it's not just Catholics, it's not just evangelicals, it's not just Pentecostals. It goes across all kinds of lines, and there are many reasons for it. But what I would submit to you today is that the main reason, at least in my opinion, is not that the fishermen and fisherwomen have ceased or are fighting, as Lucado says. It's just that they aren't doing what they were called to passionately do. Reach out, invite, heal, evangelize. And in the process, I think we have, in many respects, lost our vision, our passion, our way. The book of Proverbs says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Where there is no call forward, where there is no forward thinking, where there is no, we're about something bigger than me or you, we're about something life-giving and world-changing, nation-altering. When that goes away and we cease believing about that, and when things are just, I don't know, we were talking about some holiday, and one of my kids said to me, "Well, the reason we have holidays is so just another excuse to have some beer." Well, think about it. That's not far off, I think. Another reason to celebrate our insular being. It's interesting that the buzzword in church business these days is testimonials. What a novel idea. That is, sharing the difference that our faith, the difference that Christ has made in our lives. When did we lose that? When did we become so nervous about sharing that, talking about that? I mean, we're more excited about talking about the new restaurant that's opened up the street, or the recipe we found, or the coupons we've cut, than we are about our faith. And certainly our world gets more excited about the most recent upcoming sporting event than it does about the compelling message of the risen Christ. You heard the story a few minutes ago. Arlene read the story of Jesus calling his earliest disciples. Matthew calls two brothers, Simon Peter and Andrew. They're casting their net in the lake. For they were fishermen, it says. And Jesus says to them, "Come follow me. Come follow me, and I'm going to take the skills you have, I'm going to take the abilities you have, and I'm going to put them to a different purpose. I'm going to give them different meaning. Instead of fishing for fish, I'm going to give you the gift and the challenge and the purpose of fishing for people." And the text said they left their nets enthusiastically to follow him. Do you know where the word enthusiastic comes from? En, meaning in, thu or theo, meaning God. To be enthusiastic means to be whatever you're doing in God. So to be enthusiastic about your faith or your calling is all about being in God and the Spirit moving you and the reasons that you do what you do. The text says they left their nets enthusiastically to follow him. It's a great story, but you know what? It's not the whole story. It's not the whole story, because if you read on in the gospel, farther on in the Gospels, you'll find the story of these same disciples coming to Jesus. Their mother brings them, right? Their mother brings them, nothing like a Jewish mother, to come and ask you for something. Comes to them and says, "Okay, Jesus, you're pretty successful at what you're doing. I would like my sons, when you come into your kingdom, I would like my sons to have the seats of honor, the right and the left." And I thought to myself, wow, they've lost their calling. At that point in time, in the midst of all the other things that were going on, they'd lost track of what they were supposed to be. All of a sudden, it was about them. It was about what they would get out of it. It was about the honor and the glory, what the faith could provide to them, not through them. Likewise, there's another story, a resurrection story, where they've gone after Jesus' death, and they're out in the Sea of Galilee once again fishing, and they don't recognize Jesus on the shore, and they haven't caught anything, been fishing all night, and Jesus says, well, you're in the wrong place. Cast your net over there. And they got so many fish they couldn't even bring it in. Couldn't bring it ashore. They were fishing in the wrong place. We live in a culture of distraction. We live in a culture of distraction where when you turn on the TV, one of the ads you will see again and again and again is Samsung saying, here's the next big thing. We're always waiting for that next big thing. It markets, it sells. Here's the next big thing. We're always distracted from where we are, and there is always someone or something ready to distract us and take us there. As a wise person said, we do not live in an age where people will believe in nothing. That doesn't scare us so much as we live in an age where people will readily believe in anything. Will Campbell, parable, storyteller, preacher, Southern Baptist preacher, tells a wonderful tale. I love this story. It's a story about a conversation he had with an old curmudgeon, good old boy, in his hometown church who kind of resists coming to church and resists what the church is about. And in dialogue, the reason for doing this, he says to Pastor Campbell, is the Easter chicken. He says to him, you know, Pastor Will, one Easter my wife and I thought we'd do something really, really fine for our daughter Karen. We went to the Piggly Wiggly and they were selling purple chickens. So we bought a purple chicken for our daughter, take it home, gave it to her on Easter morning, and she just loved that purple chicken. But after a few weeks, darndest thing happened. You know, that purple chicken, it started sprouting feathers. Little pin feathers here, tail feathers, wing feathers, and the feathers it sprouted, they weren't purple. They were red. That darn chicken was a Rhode Island red. And our daughter Karen, the more it sprouted feathers, the more she didn't like that chicken. It was the ugliest looking thing you ever saw. So we took it and we throw it in the chicken coop with all the rest of the chickens. The rest of the chickens, they knew it was different. They didn't want anything to do with it. And so it stood in the corner all by itself. They'd pick on it now and then, and it suffered something horrible. Then after a while, that chicken, that Rhode Island red, started to act like the rest of them chickens. Started pecking away, pushing them out of front of the food, knocked the littler ones down. Yes, sirree. After a while, the chicken world turned that Easter chicken all the way around, till the point you couldn't tell it from all the other chickens. The Easter chicken became just like every other one. Campbell says, I knew that he wanted to argue, and so I didn't want to disappoint him. And I said to him, well, the Easter chicken is still useful. It lays eggs, doesn't it? And he responded to me, yeah, Pastor, it lays eggs, but all the other chickens lay eggs too. Who needs an Easter chicken for that? The Rotary Club serves coffee. The 4-H Club says prayers. The Red Cross collects money for hurricane victims. Mental health does counseling, and the Boy Scouts have youth programs. Who needs an Easter chicken for that? You see, I think we have lost track of our core purpose. That we do multiple things. This church literally feeds and clothes probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people over the course of the year. But there are a lot of organizations that do that. Doesn't mean we should quit or that we're not called to care for the hungry and clothe the naked. I mean, that's right there in the Gospels as well. But it does mean that there's a different purpose, that the reason we do that and for that is to reach people's souls. That you can go to all the rest of those organizations and you can do good through all of them, and they all do good, but there's only one that is called to touch, to talk about God, and to help and to heal and to hold people's souls. A seminary professor once said to us, always remember, there is a difference between giving someone a glass of cold water when they are thirsty because you are a good or generous person, and giving them a glass of cold water because they are thirsty, not simply because you're a good or generous person, but because you are called to do that in the name of Christ. There is a different motivation. There is a different purpose. And we must not forget that. So what I want you to do, and this weather is perfect, go fishing. Go fishing. It doesn't matter that it's raining. It doesn't matter that it's windy. The fishing you are called to do, you can do in good weather and in bad. Do not be afraid of your story. Your story is no more or less than the person's story next to you. Your witness of faith is just as powerful and just as significant because it is yours. You know, there's nothing worse than a preacher talking about a story and they have to read it. You shouldn't have to read your own story. Just tell it. Just tell your story. Share your story. Do not be afraid to cast your net into the water. Because that is what we and you, bottom line, are called to do. Amen.